3 weeks after the meeting between Marcus and Jake, the formal legal proceedings began. Jake Murphy walked into the courthouse where the assault had taken place and pleaded guilty to all charges. His lawyer had advised him to fight the charges, but Jake refused to put Marcus through the ordeal of a trial. The courtroom was packed with reporters, veterans, and community members who had followed the story. Jake's family sat in the front row looking somber and ashamed. Helen Murphy held her husband's hand as he stood before the judge to accept responsibility for his actions. Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to Marcus, had reviewed all the evidence and the circumstances surrounding the case. She had been particularly moved by the revelation that Jake had attacked the man who had saved his daughter's life. The irony made Jake's actions even more inexcusable. "Officer Murphy, you have pleaded guilty to assault in the third degree and civil rights violations," Judge Williams said sternly. "Your actions were captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people. There is no question about what happened that day." Jake stood with his head bowed as the judge continued. "What makes this case particularly troubling is that you attacked a decorated war hero based solely on the color of his skin. Your victim had done nothing wrong except accidentally bump into you in a crowded public space." The judge paused to let her words sink in before continuing. "I have read about Lieutenant Commander Williams's military service and his heroic actions saving your own daughter. The fact that you attacked your daughter's rescuer shows how dangerous prejudice can be when it blinds people to the truth." Marcus was sitting in the gallery wearing his dress uniform. He had been asked to provide a victim impact statement, but had chosen instead to speak about the possibility of redemption and second chances. His presence in the courtroom was a powerful reminder of Jake's terrible mistake. "Before I announce your sentence, I want to hear from Lieutenant Commander Williams," Judge Williams said, turning toward Marcus. Marcus stood and walked to the podium with the bearing of a professional soldier. He looked directly at Jake before addressing the court. "Your Honor, what Officer Murphy did was wrong and there must be consequences for his actions. But I have met with Officer Murphy and I believe he is genuinely remorseful." The courtroom was completely silent as Marcus continued. "I do not ask for leniency because Officer Murphy deserves it. I ask for a sentence that focuses on rehabilitation and education, rather than just punishment. Perhaps Officer Murphy can help other police officers learn from his mistakes." Judge Williams was impressed by Marcus's maturity and grace under difficult circumstances. "Lieutenant Commander Williams, your willingness to forgive does not excuse Officer Murphy's actions, but it does speak to your character. This court could learn something from your example." The judge then announced her sentence. Jake Murphy would serve 6 months in jail followed by 2 years of probation. He would be required to perform 500 hours of community service working with veterans organizations and anti-racism programs. He would also be permanently barred from law enforcement and required to attend anger management and bias training. Jake accepted the sentence without complaint. He knew he was receiving more mercy than he deserved thanks to Marcus's intervention. As he was led away in handcuffs, Jake looked back at Marcus and mouthed the words, "Thank you." 2 days after the sentencing, Catherine Murphy arrived home from Jordan. She had cut short her humanitarian mission to deal with the family crisis and to meet with Marcus. Catherine was nervous about seeing the man who had saved her life again under such difficult circumstances. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near the naval base. Marcus arrived first and waited at a corner table where they could have privacy. When Catherine walked in, Marcus recognized her immediately. Despite the 3 years that had passed since the rescue mission, Catherine was a petite woman with brown hair and kind eyes that showed the wisdom of someone who had seen suffering and chose to help others. She spotted Marcus right away and walked over to his table with tears already forming in her eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Williams, I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am for what my father did," Catherine said as she sat down across from Marcus. Marcus smiled gently and shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You are not responsible for your father's actions. I am just glad to see that you are doing well and continuing your humanitarian work." Catherine wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. "I have wanted to thank you properly for saving my life ever since that night 3 years ago. You and your team risked everything to bring us home, and I will never forget what you did." Marcus was moved by Catherine's sincerity and grace. "We were just doing our job. Any American soldier would have done the same thing. I'm proud that we were able to bring you and the others home safely." They talked for 2 hours about Catherine's work with refugees and Marcus's continued service in the Navy. Catherine was amazed by Marcus's humility and lack of bitterness about what her father had done. She could see why the other hostages had trusted him during that terrifying night. "I need you to know that my father is not the man who attacked you," Catherine said earnestly. "He has always had problems with anger and prejudice, but I never thought he would hurt an innocent person. What happened has destroyed him, and I think he is finally facing the truth about himself." Marcus listened carefully to Catherine's words. "People can change if they truly want to," Marcus said. "Your father has a long road ahead of him, but I believe he can become a better person if he is willing to do the work." Meanwhile, Jake Murphy was serving his jail sentence and spending his time reading books about racism and civil rights. He had requested materials about the history of prejudice in America and was learning about the experiences of people he had never tried to understand before. Helen Murphy visited her husband every week and could see that he was changing. The anger and bitterness that had defined Jake for years was being replaced by shame and a genuine desire to make amends. Helen began to hope that their marriage might survive this crisis. After his release from jail, Jake began his community service at a veterans center that helped former soldiers transition to civilian life. The work was humbling for someone who had spent his career in a position of authority. Jake was now serving the very people he had once looked down upon. Marcus occasionally visited the veterans center and would see Jake working quietly with homeless veterans and disabled soldiers. Jake never asked for recognition or tried to draw attention to himself. He was simply trying to serve others as a way of making up for the harm he had caused. 6 months into his community service, Jake was asked to speak at a police training seminar about the dangers of racial profiling. It was terrifying for him to stand in front of other officers and admit his mistakes, but Jake felt he owed it to Marcus and to the community. "I attacked a decorated war hero because I saw the color of his skin instead of the content of his character," Jake told the group of young police officers. "I let prejudice blind me to the truth, and I hurt an innocent man who had done nothing wrong." The police officers listened intently as Jake described the courthouse incident and its aftermath. Many of them had seen the video and had been shocked by Jake's behavior. Hearing him speak about his mistakes in person was powerful and educational. Marcus eventually accepted an invitation to speak alongside Jake at police training events. Together they told the story of their unlikely connection and the lessons they had learned about prejudice, forgiveness, and redemption. Their partnership became a model for how communities could heal from racial division. Catherine returned to her humanitarian work overseas but stayed in touch with Marcus through letters and emails. She was proud that something positive had emerged from her family's darkest moment. The friendship between Marcus and her father had given her hope that people really could change. Tony Williams, Marcus's brother, had been inspired by his older brother's grace under pressure and decided to join the military. He wanted to serve his country with the same honor and dignity that Marcus had shown throughout the courthouse incident and its aftermath. Years later, Marcus would reflect on the strange series of events that had brought him and Jake Murphy together. The courthouse assault had been a terrible experience, but it had also created opportunities for healing and growth that neither man could have imagined. Jake Murphy never returned to law enforcement but found purpose in his work with veterans and in speaking about the dangers of prejudice. He had lost his career and his reputation, but had gained something more valuable, an understanding of how to live with honor and dignity. The story of Marcus Williams and Jake Murphy became a symbol of hope for communities struggling with racial division. It showed that even the worst mistakes could lead to redemption if people were willing to face the truth about themselves and work to become better. Marcus continued his military service with the same dedication and courage that had made him a hero. He carried with him the knowledge that forgiveness was not weakness but strength, and that even the most unlikely people could find their way to redemption if given the chance. Jake Murphy had not slept in 2 days since learning the truth about Marcus Williams. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of his daughter being rescued by the man he had attacked. The guilt was eating him alive, and he knew he had to do something to try to make things right. Against the advice of his lawyer, Jake decided he needed to meet with Marcus face to face. He called Detective Coleman and asked if such a meeting could be arranged. Coleman was surprised by the request, but agreed to contact Marcus to see if he would be willing to meet with Murphy. Marcus was initially reluctant to meet with the man who had assaulted him. Captain Rodriguez advised against it, and his fellow SEAL teammates thought it was a bad idea. But after thinking about it overnight, Marcus decided that a meeting might help both men find some closure to the situation. The meeting was arranged to take place at the naval base in a conference room with Captain Rodriguez and Detective Coleman present as witnesses. Jake Murphy arrived 30 minutes early and sat in the parking lot, gathering courage for what he knew would be the most difficult conversation of his life. When Marcus walked into the conference room wearing his dress uniform, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. Seeing Marcus up close made the reality of what Jake had done even more painful. This was clearly a professional soldier who carried himself with dignity and honor. Marcus looked across the table at Jake Murphy and saw a broken man who appeared to have aged years in the past week. Murphy's eyes were red from crying and his hands were shaking as he tried to find words to begin the conversation. "Lieutenant Commander Williams, I do not know how to start this conversation," Jake said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I have learned that you are the man who saved my daughter Catherine 3 years ago." Marcus nodded quietly but did not speak. He wanted to hear what Murphy had to say before deciding how to respond. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Jake's labored breathing as he struggled with his emotions. "I attacked you based on nothing but the color of your skin," Jake continued with tears starting to form in his eyes. "I made assumptions about who you were without knowing anything about your character or your service to our country." Jake reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a letter that Catherine had written to the anonymous rescue team 3 years ago, thanking them for saving her life. Jake had kept the letter because he was proud of his daughter and grateful to the soldiers who had brought her home. "My daughter wrote this letter to thank the men who rescued her," Jake said as he slid the paper across the table to Marcus. "She never knew your name, but she wanted you to know how grateful she was for what you did." Marcus unfolded the letter and read Catherine's words describing her gratitude and admiration for the brave soldiers who had risked their lives to save her and the other hostages. The letter was emotional and heartfelt, filled with praise for the courage and dedication of her rescuers. "Your daughter was very brave during that mission," Marcus said quietly. "She helped keep the other hostages calm and never gave up hope. We were honored to bring her home safely." Jake broke down completely when he heard Marcus speak kindly about Catherine. The contrast between Marcus's nobility and Jake's own shameful behavior was too much to bear. Jake put his head in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably. "I do not deserve your kindness," Jake said through his tears. "I attacked the man who gave me back my daughter. I let hate and prejudice control me, and I hurt an innocent person who had done nothing wrong." Marcus watched Jake cry and felt a complex mix of emotions. He was still angry about being assaulted, but he could see that Jake was genuinely remorseful about what had happened. Marcus had seen enough of human nature during his military service to recognize sincere regret when he encountered it. "I remember that night very clearly," Marcus said, after Jake had composed himself somewhat. "Your daughter was one of 6 aid workers who had been captured while trying to help refugees. She never complained even though she was injured and frightened." Jake looked up at Marcus with red eyes full of pain and shame. "She has always been the best of our family," Jake said quietly. "Catherine chose to spend her life helping people who have nothing. She gets that from her mother, not from me." Marcus could see that Jake was struggling with more than just guilt about the courthouse incident. The man was facing the ugly truth about his own character, and it was destroying him. Marcus had seen this kind of moral crisis before in soldiers who had made terrible mistakes under pressure. "What you did was wrong," Marcus said firmly but without anger. "You attacked me based on assumptions and prejudice. But I can see that you understand the magnitude of your mistake." Jake nodded miserably. "I have spent years harboring racist attitudes and looking for ways to justify them," Jake admitted. "The courthouse incident exposed who I really am, and I am ashamed of what people saw, Captain." Rodriguez had been listening to the conversation in silence, but she was impressed by Marcus's composure and grace under difficult circumstances. She had served with Marcus for 3 years and had always known he was a man of exceptional character. Detective Coleman was taking notes, but he was also moved by what he was witnessing. He had investigated many cases of police misconduct, but had never seen such a clear example of genuine remorse from an officer who had done wrong. "I know that apologizing cannot undo what I did," Jake continued. But I want you to know that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the harm I caused. I will accept whatever punishment the court decides, and I will never wear a police uniform again." Marcus was quiet for a long moment before responding. He was thinking about forgiveness and redemption and whether people could truly change after making terrible mistakes. His military training had taught him about the importance of second chances for those who earned them. "I accept your apology," Marcus said finally. "Not because what you did was acceptable, but because I believe people can change if they truly want to. You will have to live with what you did, but you can also choose to become a better person." Jake was overwhelmed by Marcus's unexpected grace and forgiveness. He had expected anger and condemnation, but instead had received something much more powerful. Marcus was showing Jake a path toward redemption, even though Jake had not earned such kindness. "I do not understand how you can forgive me," Jake said with wonder in his voice. "I attacked you based on hate and ignorance. You have every right to want me punished severely." Marcus thought about his answer carefully before speaking. "Forgiveness is not about forgetting what happened or excusing your actions," Marcus explained. "It is about choosing not to let hate control my life the way it controlled yours." The meeting lasted for another hour, as both men talked about their experiences and their hopes for the future. Jake promised to dedicate himself to fighting racism and helping other police officers overcome their own prejudices. Marcus agreed to consider speaking to police groups about the importance of treating all citizens with respect. When the meeting ended, both men felt changed by the experience. Jake had been given an unexpected gift of forgiveness that he would spend years trying to earn. Marcus had demonstrated the kind of moral courage that had made him a hero in more ways than one. As they prepared to leave, Jake made one final request. "When Catherine comes home, would you be willing to meet with her? She wants to thank you in person for saving her life and to apologize for what I did." Marcus agreed to meet with Catherine when she returned from Jordan. He was curious to see how the young woman had grown and changed since that terrible night 3 years ago, when he had carried her to safety through enemy fire. Jake Murphy sat in his kitchen chair staring at the phone after the call with his daughter ended. His whole world had collapsed in the span of 30 minutes. The man he had attacked and humiliated was the same Navy SEAL who had saved Catherine's life 3 years ago. The weight of this revelation was crushing him completely. Helen Murphy stood behind her husband, watching him cry for the first time in their 25-year marriage. She had never seen Jake so broken and devastated. The strong man who had always been so sure of himself was now sobbing like a child who had lost everything important to him. "How could I have been so wrong?" Jake whispered through his tears. "How could I attack the man who gave me back my daughter?" Helen wanted to comfort her husband, but she was struggling with her own emotions. She was angry at Jake for his racist behavior, but also heartbroken seeing him so destroyed. The situation was complicated and painful for everyone involved. She sat down beside Jake and put her arm around his shoulders. "You let your prejudices control you," Helen said quietly. "You saw a young black man and made assumptions instead of seeing a person. This is what hate does, Jake. It blinds us to the truth." Jake knew his wife was right, but hearing the words out loud made him feel even worse. He had spent years harboring racist attitudes and looking for reasons to justify them. The courthouse incident had exposed the ugly truth about his character, and now he had to face the consequences. "What am I going to do?" Jake asked desperately. "How can I ever make this right?" Helen did not have an answer for him. Some mistakes are too big to fix with simple apologies. Jake had not only assaulted an innocent man, but he had attacked the person who had risked his life to save their daughter. The irony was so painful that it was hard to comprehend. Meanwhile, at the naval base, Marcus Williams was going through his normal daily routine, trying to focus on his duties. Captain Rodriguez had given him the option to take extended leave, but Marcus preferred to stay busy. Work helped him avoid thinking too much about the courthouse incident and the painful memories it had brought back. Marcus was reviewing mission reports when his phone rang. The caller identification showed Detective Coleman's number. Marcus had been expecting updates about the investigation, but he was not prepared for what Coleman was about to tell him. "Lieutenant Commander Williams, I need to share some information with you that you may find surprising," Coleman said carefully. "It concerns Officer Murphy and your rescue mission 3 years ago in Eastern Europe." Marcus was confused about what connection there could be between Murphy and that classified operation. The rescue mission had been one of the most dangerous assignments of his career, but it had been successful. All 12 hostages had been brought home safely, including several aid workers and diplomats. Coleman explained how he had discovered Catherine Murphy's name on the list of rescued hostages. He told Marcus that Catherine was Officer Murphy's daughter, and that Murphy had no idea about the connection when he attacked Marcus at the courthouse. Marcus was stunned into silence. He remembered Catherine Murphy clearly from that night 3 years ago. She had been one of the aid workers who had been held captive for 6 days. Marcus had personally carried her to the extraction point when she was too weak to walk. He had been shot in the shoulder during the rescue but had refused medical treatment until all the hostages were safe. "Are you telling me that Officer Murphy attacked the man who saved his daughter's life?" Marcus asked in disbelief. Coleman confirmed the connection and explained that Catherine had just called her father to tell him the truth. Murphy was now aware of what he had done and was reportedly devastated by the revelation. The irony of the situation was almost impossible to believe, but the facts were undeniable. Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions hearing this news. Part of him felt vindicated that Murphy's assumptions about him had been so completely wrong. But Marcus also felt sorry for Murphy, who now had to live with the knowledge that he had attacked his daughter's rescuer. "What happens now?" Marcus asked Coleman. "The investigation continues and charges will still be filed," Coleman replied. "But this information changes how everyone understands what happened." Murphy's actions were based on ignorance and prejudice rather than any real threat. After hanging up the phone, Marcus sat in his office thinking about the strange way life sometimes brings people together. He had risked his life to save Catherine Murphy without knowing anything about her family or background. Now 3 years later, her father had attacked him based on the color of his skin rather than the content of his character. Marcus remembered carrying Catherine to safety that night in Eastern Europe. She had been frightened and exhausted but had thanked him repeatedly for coming to rescue her. Marcus had told her that it was his honor to serve and that any American soldier would have done the same thing. The rescue mission had been dangerous and several team members had been wounded. But Marcus and his fellow SEALs had considered it a privilege to bring the hostages home safely. They had trained for years to handle exactly those kinds of operations and had executed the mission flawlessly. Despite heavy enemy resistance, now Marcus learned that one of the people he had saved was the daughter of the man who had attacked him. The connection seemed like something from a movie rather than real life. But Marcus had seen enough of the world to know that truth was often stranger than fiction. Jake Murphy spent the rest of the day in his house, unable to face going outside. Neighbors and reporters were still gathered on his street hoping to get comments about the courthouse incident. Jake could not imagine facing questions from people who now knew he had attacked a genuine American hero. Helen Murphy called her job to say she would not be coming in for the rest of the week. She needed time to process what had happened and to figure out how their family would move forward. The revelation about Marcus saving Catherine had changed everything about how she viewed the courthouse incident. Their son Kevin called from college after hearing about the connection from Catherine. Kevin was studying criminal justice and hoped to become a police officer like his father. But seeing his father's behavior had made Kevin question whether he wanted to follow that career path. "Dad, how could you not see that man was a hero?" Kevin asked during their emotional phone conversation. Jake had no good answer for his son. He had been blinded by prejudice and had seen only what he expected to see, rather than what was really there. Marcus Williams had been wearing a uniform covered with ribbons and medals that told the story of his service, but Jake had ignored all the evidence of Marcus's character, Catherine. Murphy was making arrangements to return home from Jordan as soon as possible. She felt she needed to meet Marcus Williams in person, to thank him again for saving her life and to apologize for her father's actions. The humanitarian organization she worked for understood the situation and agreed to give her emergency leave. The news media was beginning to learn about the connection between Marcus and Catherine. When the story broke, it would add another layer of drama to an already incredible situation. The man who had been assaulted by a racist police officer was revealed to be the hero who had saved the officer's daughter from terrorists. Marcus Williams went home that evening and called his parents to tell them about the day's developments. His mother cried when she heard about the connection to Catherine Murphy. His father was amazed by the strange coincidence that had brought the two families together in such a tragic way. "Son, you saved that girl's life and her father repaid you with hate and violence," Marcus's father said sadly. "It shows how dangerous prejudice can be when people refuse to see the truth about others." Marcus agreed with his father, but he was also thinking about forgiveness and redemption. Murphy had made a terrible mistake based on racist assumptions, but he was now facing the consequences of his actions. Marcus wondered if there might be a way for something positive to come from this painful situation. Detective Coleman sat in his office early Tuesday morning preparing for one of the most difficult phone calls of his career. He had spent the previous evening reviewing the classified mission reports and coordinating with military officials about what information could be shared. The call to Catherine Murphy in Jordan was scheduled for 8 in the morning to account for the time difference. Jake Murphy was at his kitchen table drinking coffee and staring at the morning newspaper. His assault on Marcus Williams was front-page news again with a headline that made his stomach turn. The article included new details about Marcus's military service and quotes from fellow veterans expressing outrage about the attack. Murphy felt sick reading about the man he had wronged. Helen Murphy was getting ready for work but moving slowly around the kitchen. She had barely slept and was dreading another day of questions and stares from neighbors and co-workers. The stress of the situation was affecting the entire family, and Helen was not sure their marriage could survive the shame and embarrassment Jake had brought upon them. At the refugee camp in Jordan, Catherine Murphy was finishing her morning rounds in the medical tent. She had been working 18-hour days treating Syrian refugees who had fled their war-torn country. The work was exhausting but rewarding, and Catherine felt like she was making a difference in the lives of desperate people. Catherine had limited access to news from America and had not heard about the incident involving her father. She was focused entirely on her humanitarian work and had not checked social media or news websites in several days. The camp's internet connection was unreliable, and Catherine preferred to use her free time for rest rather than browsing. Online Detective Coleman placed the call using the secure satellite connection that had been arranged by the State Department. The phone rang several times before Catherine answered in a tired voice. She had been awake since 4 in the morning treating patients and was surprised to receive an official call from the United States. "Miss Murphy, this is Detective Ray Coleman with the Internal Affairs Division of the City Police Department. I need to speak with you about an incident involving your father, Officer Jake Murphy," Coleman said carefully. Catherine felt her heart skip a beat. She immediately feared that something had happened to her father, or that he had been injured in the line of duty. "Is my father hurt? What kind of incident?" Catherine asked with concern in her voice. Coleman explained that Jake was not physically injured but had been involved in a serious situation at the courthouse. He described the assault on Marcus Williams without initially revealing the connection to Catherine's rescue. Coleman wanted to prepare Catherine for the shocking news he was about to share with her. "Your father physically attacked a Navy officer who was attending his brother's court hearing. The incident was recorded and has become a major news story," Coleman explained gently. Catherine was stunned and confused by what she was hearing. Her father had always been strict and had strong opinions, but she could not imagine him attacking an innocent person. "I do not understand. Why would my father attack a Navy officer? That does not sound like something he would do," Catherine said. Coleman took a deep breath before continuing. "The officer your father attacked is Lieutenant Commander Marcus Williams. Miss Murphy, I believe you know that name from your time in captivity 3 years ago," Coleman said carefully. There was complete silence on the phone for several seconds as Catherine processed what the detective had said. She remembered the name Marcus Williams very clearly. He was one of the Navy SEALs who had rescued her from the terrorist compound. She would never forget the face of the man who had carried her to safety while bullets flew around them. "Are you telling me that my father attacked the man who saved my life?" Catherine asked in a voice that was barely a whisper. Coleman confirmed the connection and explained how he had discovered it while reviewing the case files. He told Catherine about the rescue mission, details that were in Marcus's service record, and how her name appeared on the list of people who had been extracted from the compound. Catherine began to cry as the full impact of the situation hit her. The man who had risked his life to bring her home safely had been assaulted by her own father. The irony was devastating and almost impossible to comprehend. "Does my father know about the connection?" Catherine asked through her tears. "No, he does not know. The rescue mission was classified and the identities of the team members were kept secret. Your father would have known that American Special Forces rescued you, but he would not have known their names," Coleman explained. Catherine was overwhelmed with emotion and struggled to find words. She remembered Marcus Williams clearly from that terrible night 3 years ago. He had appeared in the darkness like an angel to rescue her and the other hostages. Marcus had been wounded during the extraction but had refused medical treatment until everyone was safely evacuated. "I have to call my father right away. He needs to know what he has done," Catherine said urgently. Coleman advised her to be careful about revealing classified information, but agreed that Jake needed to understand the connection. They arranged for Catherine to call her father immediately while Coleman monitored the conversation. To ensure no security protocols were violated, Jake Murphy was still sitting at his kitchen table when his phone rang. He was surprised to see Catherine's number on the caller identification because she rarely called during her assignments overseas. Jake answered the phone expecting to hear his daughter's cheerful voice, but instead heard her crying. "Dad, I just heard about what happened at the courthouse. I need to tell you something very important about Lieutenant Commander Williams," Catherine said between sobs. Jake was confused by his daughter's emotional reaction to the news. He had no idea how Catherine could know about the incident, or why she would be so upset about a stranger. "How do you know about what happened? You are in Jordan working at the refugee camp," Jake said. Catherine took a deep breath and tried to compose herself before continuing. "Dad, the man you attacked is not a stranger to our family. 3 years ago, when I was kidnapped by terrorists, Lieutenant Commander Williams was part of the team that rescued me. He saved my life," Catherine said clearly. The phone fell from Jake's hand and clattered onto the kitchen table. Helen heard the noise and came running into the room to see what had happened. Jake's face had gone completely white and he was staring at the phone in shock. "Dad, are you there? Please talk to me." Catherine's voice came from the phone speaker. Jake picked up the phone with shaking hands. His mind was racing as he tried to process what his daughter had just told him. The man he had attacked and humiliated was the same person who had risked his life to save Catherine from terrorists. The realization was crushing and overwhelming. "Tell me exactly what happened during the rescue," Jake said in a voice that Helen barely recognized. Catherine described the 6 days of captivity and the fear she had felt before the rescue team arrived. She told her father about how Marcus had carried her to safety while under enemy fire, and how he had been wounded but refused treatment until all the hostages were evacuated. She explained that Marcus and his team were heroes who had saved 12 innocent lives. Jake Murphy began to sob as he listened to his daughter's story. The man he had dismissed as just another entitled soldier was actually the person who had given him back his daughter. The racist assumptions and prejudices that had driven his attack on Marcus were revealed to be completely wrong and utterly shameful. Helen Murphy listened to the conversation with growing horror and understanding. She had always been grateful to the anonymous soldiers who had rescued Catherine, but she had never imagined that one of them would cross paths with their family again. The fact that Jake had attacked Catherine's rescuer was almost too terrible to believe. "Dad, you have to make this right somehow. That man is a hero and you treated him like a criminal," Catherine said firmly despite her tears. Jake could barely speak through his own crying. "I did not know. I had no idea who he was. God help me, I attacked the man who saved your life," Jake said in anguish. The phone call continued for another 30 minutes as Catherine told her father more details about the rescue mission and Marcus's courage under fire. Every word made Jake feel worse about what he had done. He had let his prejudices blind him to the truth about a genuine American hero. After hanging up the phone, Jake sat in his kitchen chair and wept openly for the first time in years. Helen put her hand on his shoulder but said nothing. There were no words that could make this situation better or undo the terrible mistake Jake had made. Out the truth about the connection between Marcus and Catherine would change everything about how people understood the courthouse incident. It added a layer of tragic irony that made Jake's actions even more inexcusable. The man he had attacked based on racial prejudice was the same person who had saved his daughter's life, without knowing or caring about her race or background. Detective Coleman was going through Marcus Williams's military service record for the 3rd time when something caught his attention. He had been focusing on the combat decorations and commendations, but now he was reading the detailed mission reports. One particular operation from 3 years ago stood out because it involved civilian rescues rather than standard combat operations. The mission report was heavily classified, but Coleman had been given access due to the ongoing investigation. He read about a rescue operation in Eastern Europe, where Marcus's SEAL team had successfully extracted a group of captured diplomats and aid workers from a terrorist compound. The operation had taken place over 2 days and involved significant risk to the rescue team. Coleman studied the list of people who had been rescued during that mission. There were 12 names total, including embassy staff, aid workers, and journalists. One name made him stop reading and look twice. Catherine Murphy, listed as an aid worker for Doctors Without Borders, had been held captive for 6 days before the rescue team reached her. The detective felt his pulse quicken as he realized the potential connection. Catherine Murphy shared a last name with Officer Jake Murphy. Coleman quickly accessed the police personnel database and confirmed his suspicion. Catherine Murphy was listed as Jake Murphy's daughter in his emergency contact information. Coleman leaned back in his chair and tried to process what he had discovered. The man Jake Murphy had assaulted in the courthouse was the same Navy SEAL who had risked his life to rescue Jake's daughter 3 years ago. The irony was almost impossible to believe, but the evidence was right there in the official records. The rescue mission had been classified and the identities of the SEAL team members were kept secret for security reasons. Jake Murphy would have known that his daughter was rescued by American Special Forces, but he would not have known their names or faces. Catherine herself would only have known her rescuers as anonymous soldiers who appeared in the darkness to save her life. Coleman called his contact at Naval Special Warfare Command to verify the information. Commander Patricia Hayes confirmed that Marcus Williams had indeed participated in the rescue mission and had been instrumental in its success. According to the mission report, Marcus had personally carried Catherine Murphy to safety while under enemy fire. Lieutenant Commander Williams took a bullet in the shoulder during that extraction, Commander Hayes told Coleman over the phone. He refused medical attention until all the hostages were safely evacuated. It was an exemplary display of courage and dedication. Coleman hung up the phone and stared at the document spread across his desk. He was looking at one of the most incredible coincidences he had ever encountered in his law enforcement career. A racist police officer had assaulted the very man who had saved his daughter's life, and neither of them knew about the connection. The detective faced a difficult decision about what to do with this information. The rescue mission details were classified and could not be revealed publicly. But Coleman felt that Jake Murphy deserved to know the truth about the man he had attacked. The knowledge might not change the legal consequences, but it would certainly change Murphy's understanding of what he had done. Coleman decided to consult with his superiors and the military liaison officers about how to handle the sensitive information. The rescue mission was still classified, but there might be a way to inform Murphy about his connection to Marcus without revealing operational details. Meanwhile, Catherine Murphy was working at a refugee camp in Jordan, completely unaware of what had happened to her father or the man who had saved her life. She had limited internet access at the remote camp and had not seen the news coverage of the courthouse incident. Catherine was focused on providing medical care to Syrian refugees who had fled their war-torn country. Jake Murphy spent another sleepless night thinking about his actions at the courthouse. The media coverage was getting worse and his neighbors were starting to avoid him. Murphy knew his career was over and his reputation was destroyed. But what bothered him most was the growing realization that his attack on Marcus had been completely unjustified. Murphy had always considered himself a good police officer who protected decent people from criminals. But the video of the courthouse incident showed him attacking a decorated war hero for no reason. Murphy was being forced to confront the ugly truth about his own prejudices and anger. Helen Murphy had barely spoken to her husband since the incident. She was ashamed of what Jake had done and angry that he had brought disgrace on their family. Helen had always known that Jake had strong opinions about race, but she had never imagined he would physically attack an innocent person. Their adult son Kevin called from college to express his disappointment and embarrassment. Kevin had seen the video on social media and was horrified that his father was the police officer in the footage. Friends and classmates were asking Kevin about his father's actions and he had no way to defend what had happened. Detective Coleman met with Police Chief Sullivan and the federal investigators, who were reviewing the case. He explained the connection he had discovered between Marcus and Catherine Murphy. Everyone in the room was stunned by the revelation and its implications for the case. "This changes everything about how we understand this incident," Chief Sullivan said after hearing the details. Murphy attacked the man who saved his daughter's life. The federal investigators were particularly interested in the connection because it demonstrated the complete lack of justification for Murphy's actions. If Murphy had known who Marcus really was, the assault never would have happened. The incident was purely the result of racial prejudice and assumptions. Coleman was given permission to contact Catherine Murphy through official channels. The State Department helped arrange a secure communication link to the refugee camp in Jordan. Coleman would be able to speak with Catherine and explain what had happened without revealing classified details about the rescue mission. The call was scheduled for the following morning due to the time difference. Coleman prepared carefully for the conversation because he knew it would be difficult for Catherine to learn about her father's actions. She would also need to understand her connection to the victim without compromising the security of past operations. Marcus continued his duties at the naval base while the investigation proceeded. His fellow SEAL team members were supportive but also angry about what had happened. These were men who had served in combat with Marcus and knew his character personally. They found it hard to believe that anyone could look at Marcus in uniform and see a threat rather than a protector. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating with Navy headquarters about the media response to the incident. The Navy wanted to support Marcus while maintaining the professional image of the service. Military leaders were using the incident to highlight the contributions of service members and the importance of treating veterans with respect. The story continued to gain national attention as more details emerged about Marcus's heroic service record. Television news programs were featuring interviews with military experts who explained the significance of his decorations and combat experience. The contrast between Marcus's distinguished service and Murphy's unprovoked attack was becoming a symbol of larger issues in American society. Veterans organizations were mobilizing to support Marcus and demand justice. The VFW announced plans for a rally at the courthouse to show solidarity with Marcus and protest the attack. Active-duty military personnel were expressing outrage on social media that one of their own could be treated this way. Murphy's police union was quietly backing away from their initial support. Union leaders realized that defending Murphy's actions was impossible, given the video evidence and Marcus's military record. Several Union members had served in the military themselves and were personally offended by the attack on a fellow veteran. The investigation was moving quickly toward criminal charges against Murphy. The evidence was overwhelming and the public pressure for justice was intense. Detective Coleman knew that filing charges was just the beginning of a legal process that would take months to complete. But first, Coleman had to make a phone call that would change everything for both families involved. The conversation with Catherine Murphy would reveal the incredible connection between the victim and the perpetrator. It would add another layer of tragedy and irony to an already devastating situation. Detective Ray Coleman sat in his office reviewing the evidence from the courthouse incident. He had been investigating police misconduct for 15 years, but had never seen a case with such clear evidence of wrongdoing. The security camera footage showed everything from multiple angles. Murphy's unprovoked assault on Marcus Williams was captured in perfect detail. Coleman spread the witness statements across his desk. 7 people had given written accounts of what they saw. Every single statement told the same story. Officer Murphy had escalated a minor accidental contact into a major confrontation without any justification. Marcus Williams had remained calm and respectful throughout the encounter until Murphy physically attacked him. The detective picked up Marcus's military service record that had been provided by the Navy. The document was impressive and filled with commendations, awards, and mission reports. Marcus had served 3 combat tours as a Navy SEAL in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had been awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during a mission where he saved 8 fellow soldiers under heavy enemy fire. Coleman also reviewed Murphy's personnel file. The contrast was stark and troubling. Murphy had received multiple complaints over the years for excessive force and inappropriate behavior. There had been accusations of racial profiling that were never fully investigated. His superiors had noted anger management issues in several performance reviews. The video of the incident had gone viral on social media within hours. Coleman watched it again on his computer screen. The footage was clear and damaging. Murphy could be seen becoming increasingly aggressive while Marcus remained calm. The moment when Murphy shoved Marcus into the marble pillar was captured from 3 different camera angles. Veterans organizations across the country were demanding answers. The American Legion issued a statement calling for Murphy to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Veterans of foreign wars posted the video on their website with a message about protecting those who served their country. Military families were expressing outrage on social media that a decorated war hero could be treated this way. Marcus was released from the hospital after 6 hours of observation. His brother Tony met him at the discharge desk with tears in his eyes. Tony felt terrible that his court case had led to his brother being assaulted. Marcus hugged his younger brother and told him not to blame himself for what happened. "This is not your fault," Marcus said to Tony as they walked to the parking lot. "Some people carry hate in their hearts and look for reasons to let it out." Tony looked at his older brother with admiration. Marcus had always been his hero, but seeing how he handled this situation made Tony proud to be related to him. "How are you not angry about what happened?" Tony asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment before answering. "I am angry, but I learned a long time ago that anger without purpose is just destructive. We will let the system work and see if justice is served," Marcus said calmly. Captain Rodriguez called a meeting with the Navy's Public Affairs Office to discuss how to handle the media attention. The story was being covered by national news networks and military publications. The Navy wanted to support Marcus while avoiding any appearance of interfering with the civilian investigation. "Lieutenant Commander Williams is one of our finest officers," Captain Rodriguez told the public affairs team. "He has served his country with distinction and deserves to be treated with respect by all law enforcement." The police union initially issued a statement supporting Murphy and claiming he had followed proper procedures. But as more details emerged about Marcus's heroic service record, the union's position became harder to defend. Several union members privately expressed embarrassment about defending Murphy's actions. Police Chief Sullivan called Detective Coleman into her office to discuss the investigation timeline. Sullivan was feeling pressure from city officials who were worried about lawsuits and bad publicity. The mayor had already received dozens of calls from angry citizens demanding action. "How strong is our case against Murphy?" Chief Sullivan asked Coleman directly. Coleman laid out the evidence systematically. "The video footage is devastating. We have multiple credible witnesses. The victim is a highly decorated military officer with an impeccable record. Murphy has a history of complaints and poor judgment. This is as clear-cut as these cases get," Coleman explained. Sullivan nodded grimly. She had hoped there might be some way to minimize the damage, but the evidence was overwhelming. "What are you recommending for charges?" she asked. "Assault in the 3rd degree at minimum, possibly civil rights violations depending on what the federal prosecutors decide. His career is over regardless of what charges are filed," Coleman said bluntly. The story continued to gain momentum in the media. CNN picked up the story and interviewed several military experts who explained the significance of Marcus's decorations. A retired admiral called Murphy's actions a disgrace to law enforcement and an insult to everyone who wears a uniform. Social media was filled with posts supporting Marcus and condemning Murphy. The hashtag #JusticeForMarcus began trending on Twitter. People were sharing the video and expressing outrage that a war hero could be treated this way. Veterans were posting photos of themselves in uniform with messages of support. Murphy spent the day at home watching the news coverage with growing dread. Every story made him look worse and Marcus look more heroic. Murphy had not realized the extent of Marcus's military accomplishments when he attacked him. Learning about Marcus's service record made Murphy feel even worse about what he had done. Helen Murphy had not spoken to her husband since the morning news shows featured the story. She was ashamed to be associated with what happened and angry that Jake had embarrassed their family. Their adult children had already called expressing their disappointment and concern about the family name. Marcus returned to the naval base where his fellow officers greeted him with concern and support. His SEAL teammates were particularly angry about the assault. These were men who had served in combat with Marcus and knew his character personally. They wanted to do something to help, but Marcus asked them to let the investigation proceed normally. "The truth will come out," Marcus told his teammates. "Violence is not always the answer to violence." The base commander issued a statement expressing full confidence in Marcus and condemning the attack. Military personnel around the world were following the story and offering support. Messages of encouragement were pouring in from active duty soldiers, veterans, and military families. Tony's court hearing was postponed for 2 weeks due to the circumstances. The prosecutor and defense attorney agreed that the media attention around the family made it impossible to proceed immediately. Tony was grateful for the delay because it gave him time to focus on supporting his brother. Detective Coleman continued gathering evidence even though the case seemed straightforward. He wanted to make sure every detail was documented properly. The investigation was moving quickly because of the public attention and the clear evidence of wrongdoing. By the end of the day, Coleman had enough evidence to recommend criminal charges against Murphy. The assault was captured on video and witnessed by multiple credible people. Murphy's history of complaints and poor judgment would be presented to show a pattern of behavior. The case against him was strong and getting stronger as more details emerged. The real question was not whether Murphy would be charged, but how severe the charges would be. Federal prosecutors were reviewing the case to determine if civil rights violations had occurred. The FBI was also conducting their own investigation into Murphy's history with minority citizens. Marcus spent the evening at home with his family, trying to process what had happened. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan and Iraq, but being attacked by a police officer in his own country was somehow more disturbing. It reminded him that wearing the uniform did not protect him from prejudice and hate. Marcus Williams stood against the marble pillar with blood running down the back of his neck. His head was spinning from hitting the stone, but he remained upright. Years of military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. Even though he had just been assaulted for no reason, Marcus did not raise his voice or make any threatening moves toward Officer Murphy. The courthouse lobby had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring at the scene in shock. A police officer had just attacked a man in military dress uniform in front of dozens of witnesses. Cell phones were already out and recording as people realized they were watching something that would be on the news. Security guards rushed over to the scene. The head of courthouse security was a former Marine named Carl Rodriguez, who immediately recognized the significance of Marcus's ribbons and medals. Rodriguez had served in Iraq and knew real combat decorations when he saw them. He looked at Murphy with disgust before turning his attention to Marcus. "Sir, please remain still while we get medical attention," Rodriguez said to Marcus with the respect due to a fellow veteran. Murphy was breathing heavily and trying to justify what he had just done. "He was resisting my questions. He refused to show identification when requested," Murphy said loudly, hoping someone would believe his version of events. But too many people had witnessed the entire confrontation. A lawyer who had been waiting for her case called out from across the lobby. "That is not true. I saw the whole thing. The officer attacked that young man for no reason," she said clearly. Other witnesses began speaking up. An elderly woman said she had watched Murphy become increasingly aggressive, while the sailor remained polite and calm. A businessman said he had recorded part of the incident on his phone. The security cameras had captured everything from multiple angles. Paramedics arrived within minutes of being called. They carefully examined the cut on Marcus's head and checked for signs of concussion. Marcus answered their questions clearly, but they could see he was shaken by what had happened. The paramedic, a young woman named Lisa, was gentle as she cleaned the wound. "You are going to need a few stitches," Lisa told Marcus. "We should take you to the hospital to make sure you do not have a concussion." Marcus was more worried about his brother than himself. "My brother has a hearing this morning. I need to be here for him," Marcus said, trying to look at his watch. Carl Rodriguez overheard and spoke up. "Sir, I will make sure someone contacts the court about what happened. Your brother's case will probably be postponed given the circumstances," Rodriguez said respectfully. Murphy was becoming more agitated as he realized how bad this looked. More people were arriving in the lobby, and someone had already posted video of the incident online. Murphy could see courthouse staff and other police officers looking at him with shock and disapproval. Detective Ray Coleman from Internal Affairs was called to the scene. Coleman had investigated police misconduct for 15 years and had seen many bad situations. But when he arrived and saw the video footage, he knew this case would be different. The evidence was overwhelming and there were too many witnesses to ignore. Coleman interviewed several witnesses while the paramedics worked on Marcus. Every person told the same story. Murphy had escalated a minor accidental bump into a major confrontation. Marcus had remained calm and respectful throughout the incident, until Murphy physically assaulted him. The local news station received a tip about the incident and sent a reporter to the courthouse. By the time Marcus was being loaded into an ambulance, cameras were rolling and the story was already being written. The headline would be simple and damaging for the police department. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that Marcus had a mild concussion along with the laceration. They wanted to keep him for observation for a few hours. While Marcus was being treated, his commanding officer, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, received a phone call that made her furious. Captain Rodriguez was a career Navy officer who had worked her way up through the ranks. She commanded respect from everyone who served under her, and she protected her sailors fiercely. When she heard that one of her best officers had been assaulted while in uniform, she dropped everything and drove to the hospital. Marcus was sitting on a hospital bed with his head bandaged when Captain Rodriguez arrived. She took one look at him and her jaw tightened with anger. Marcus tried to stand when she entered, but she waved him back down. "What exactly happened at that courthouse?" Captain Rodriguez asked, though she had already been briefed on the incident. Marcus explained the events clearly and without emotion. He told her about going to support his brother, the accidental bump, and Murphy's increasingly hostile behavior. He described how Murphy had made comments about his race and his military service before physically attacking him. Captain Rodriguez had read Marcus's service record many times. He was one of the most decorated young officers she had ever commanded. Marcus had served multiple combat tours as a Navy SEAL and had saved countless lives during dangerous missions. The idea that someone would attack him while he wore the uniform was personally offensive to her. "This will not stand," Captain Rodriguez said firmly. "The Navy takes care of its own and we will make sure justice is served." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Murphy was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His fellow officers were divided in their reactions. Some of the older officers who shared Murphy's prejudices initially supported him, but when they saw the video footage and learned about Marcus's military record, many changed their tune. Police Chief Karen Sullivan held an emergency meeting with her senior staff. Sullivan was a professional who had worked hard to improve relations between the police and the community. The Murphy incident was exactly the kind of publicity nightmare she had tried to prevent. "We have a decorated war hero who was assaulted by one of our officers for no reason whatsoever," Sullivan said to her staff. "This is going to be a major problem for the department." The video of the incident was spreading rapidly on social media. Veterans organizations were already demanding answers. Military families were expressing outrage that a serving officer could be treated this way. The story was gaining national attention, and the pressure on the police department was mounting. Murphy went home to his wife, Helen, who had already seen the news coverage. Helen Murphy was ashamed of what her husband had done. She had always known he had strong opinions about race, but seeing him attack an innocent man on television was shocking to her. "How could you do something like this, Jake?" Helen asked when Murphy walked through the door. Murphy tried to defend himself, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "You do not understand what it is like out there. These people think they can do whatever they want," Murphy said weakly. Helen stared at her husband as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "That young man was wearing our country's uniform, Jake. He was decorated for his service, and you attacked him like a common criminal," she said with disgust in her voice. The incident was already changing lives and destroying reputations. Marcus would recover from his physical injuries, but the emotional impact would last much longer. Murphy's career was over and his family relationships were damaged. The truth about what happened that day was clear to everyone who witnessed it. But the real consequences were just beginning to unfold. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Williams stood in the busy courthouse lobby, wearing his crisp navy dress blues. The dark blue uniform was decorated with colorful ribbons that told the story of his military service. Among them was the Navy Cross and Purple Heart, medals that few soldiers ever receive. Marcus checked his watch and looked around the crowded space filled with lawyers, defendants, and their families. He was here for his younger brother Tony, who faced drug possession charges. Tony had made some bad choices, but Marcus believed in giving family a second chance. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and Marcus wanted to be there to support his brother. He had taken leave from his duties at Naval Special Warfare Command to be here today. The courthouse was an old building with marble floors and high ceilings. People walked quickly across the polished stone, their footsteps echoing in the large space. Marcus noticed the mix of people around him. Some looked nervous, others appeared confident with their expensive lawyers. Security guards stood at various points watching everyone who entered and left. Officer Jake Murphy had been working as a police officer for 20 years. He was a big man with graying hair and hands that showed years of physical work. Murphy had strong opinions about many things and was not shy about sharing them. He believed that some people got special treatment they did not deserve. When he saw Marcus in his military uniform, Murphy felt annoyed rather than respectful. Murphy had been called to the courthouse to testify in a case. He was walking toward the elevator when he noticed the young black man in the Navy uniform. The ribbons and medals meant nothing to Murphy. He saw what he always saw, someone who he thought was probably trying to impress people with a fancy uniform. Murphy had served briefly in the Army years ago but never saw combat. He often felt bitter about soldiers who had more recognition than he did. Marcus was reading a text message from his commanding officer when he accidentally stepped sideways and bumped into Murphy. It was a light contact, the kind that happens in crowded spaces every day. Marcus immediately looked up and said sorry to the older white man in the police uniform. Murphy stopped walking and turned to face Marcus. His face was already showing anger even though the bump had been clearly accidental. Murphy looked Marcus up and down, taking in the uniform and the young face wearing it. "Watch where you are going," Murphy said in a loud voice that made people nearby turn to look. Marcus was surprised by the aggressive tone but remained calm. He had learned during his military training to stay composed under pressure. "I apologize, sir. It was an accident," Marcus replied politely. Murphy stepped closer to Marcus, invading his personal space. "Let me see some identification," Murphy demanded, even though they were in a public courthouse where no identification was required. Marcus was confused by the request but remained respectful. "I am here for my brother's hearing. I do not understand why you need to see my identification," he said calmly. The response made Murphy even angrier. He interpreted Marcus's reasonable question as defiance. "Do not give me attitude, boy. I said show me some identification right now," Murphy said, his voice getting louder. Several people in the lobby began to notice the confrontation. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something was about to happen. The security guards near the metal detectors looked over but did not immediately intervene. Marcus realized this was about more than the accidental bump. He had experienced racial profiling before, even while wearing his military uniform. The situation felt familiar and frustrating. "Officer, I am Lieutenant Commander Marcus Williams of the United States Navy. I am here as a civilian attending my brother's court hearing," Marcus explained, keeping his voice steady. Murphy laughed in a way that was not friendly. "Lieutenant Commander, you look like you are about 12 years old. Where did you get that uniform, a costume shop?" Murphy said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The insult about his uniform hit Marcus hard. He had earned every ribbon and medal through years of dangerous service. He had risked his life for his country more times than he could count. But he forced himself to stay calm and not react with anger. "These ribbons represent my service to our country," Marcus said quietly but firmly. "I would appreciate it if you would allow me to go to my brother's hearing." Murphy's face turned red with anger. He felt like this young man was showing him up in front of witnesses. "You think you are special because you wear that uniform? You think you are better than me?" Murphy yelled. Marcus could see that Murphy was beyond reason. The situation was escalating quickly, and Marcus knew he needed to either leave or de-escalate. "I think we have a misunderstanding here. I mean, no disrespect to you or your badge," Marcus said, trying to calm things down. But Murphy was past listening. Years of anger and prejudice came to the surface. "You people always think you deserve special treatment. Always playing the victim," Murphy said, using the phrase that revealed his true feelings. Marcus felt his jaw tighten but maintained his military bearing. He had heard those words before from people who could not see past the color of his skin. "I am just trying to support my family," Marcus said simply. Murphy moved even closer, his chest almost touching Marcus. "Maybe your family should learn to stay out of trouble instead of having Big Brother come rescue them," Murphy said with a sneer. That comment crossed a line for Marcus. Talking about his family was different than attacking him personally. But before Marcus could respond, Murphy made his biggest mistake. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall," Murphy ordered, as if Marcus were under arrest. Marcus did not move. He had done nothing wrong and was not going to submit to an illegal detention. "Officer, I have committed no crime." "I am not going to comply with an unlawful order," Marcus said firmly. Murphy lost all control. In front of dozens of witnesses and security cameras, He grabbed Marcus by the shoulders and shoved him hard against the marble pillar behind them. Marcus's head hit the stone with a loud crack that echoed through the lobby. Marcus stumbled but did not fall. Blood began to trickle from a cut on the back of his head where it had struck the marble. The lobby went silent as everyone stared at what had just happened. A decorated military officer had been assaulted by a police officer for no reason at all. Security guards finally rushed over as Marcus leaned against the pillar, dazed but still standing. Murphy stood there breathing hard, realizing too late that his actions had been recorded by multiple witnesses and cameras. The incident that would change both their lives forever had just begun.